My stepmother insisted I pay rent to stay in my own house while her kids lived there without contributing a dime. When I refused, she tried to persuade my father to throw me out. But when I revealed the truth about the house's ownership, everything shifted. Sandra's grin widened as she said, "If you won't pay, you'll need to find somewhere else to live. We can't have freeloaders here." I sat at the dining table, my meal long gone cold, her words lingering in the air like a bitter chill. The unfairness of it all burned inside me. Years of being treated like a servant while her children did nothing. Something within me finally snapped. I kept my voice steady and said, "So, let me understand this. James, who finished college 2 years ago and spends his days gaming, doesn't pay rent. Melissa, in her 3rd year of college and never lifting a finger for chores, gets to stay for free. But I'm expected to pay?" Sandra dabbed her lips with a napkin, her tone smug. "My children don't need to pay while they're building their futures." A strange calm settled over me, perhaps from years of suppressed frustration or the moment for truth arriving. A faint smile crossed my face. Not the polite one I used to keep peace, but something sharper, something that made Sandra's confident expression waver. "That's curious," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I won't be paying rent because this house is mine." The room went silent, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears. James let out a mocking laugh, followed by Melissa's high-pitched giggle. Sandra chuckled too, but there was a nervous edge to it. "What are you saying?" she asked, still trying to laugh it off. "This house belongs to me," I repeated, my gaze locked on hers. The laughter faded as my words sank in. Sandra's face shifted from amusement to confusion, then disbelief, and finally, a hint of panic. "That's absurd," she stammered, reaching for her phone. "I'm calling your father right now." Her manicured nails tapped furiously as she put the call on speaker, the ringing echoing through the kitchen. "Hello?" My father's voice came through, crackly and distant. "David," Sandra said, her tone tight but controlled. "Ruby's spinning some wild tale about owning the house. That's not true, is it?" The pause on the other end stretched endlessly. When my father spoke, his voice was hesitant. "Well," he cleared his throat, "my in-laws left the house in Ruby's name before they passed. I didn't think—" "You didn't think to tell me?" Sandra nearly shrieked. "How could you keep this from me?" "I didn't think it mattered," my father mumbled weakly. "It never seemed important." "Not important?" Sandra's face flushed crimson. "Not important that your teenage daughter owns our home?" She hung up abruptly, nearly slamming the phone down. The kitchen fell into an uneasy hush, broken only by the hum of the fridge. James and Melissa stared at me like I was a stranger. Sandra's breathing was heavy as she tried to regain control. When she spoke again, her voice was falsely cheerful, but a tremor betrayed her. "Well," she forced a laugh that sounded more like a sob. "This is just a misunderstanding. Ruby, let's forget this whole conversation, shall we?" I'd lost my appetite entirely. Without a word, I stood and headed upstairs. As I climbed, I heard hurried whispers below, Sandra's sharp tone mixed with James and Melissa's anxious murmurs. By the next morning, I was awake early, staring at the ceiling, reflecting on how much had changed overnight. I heard Sandra downstairs, the familiar clink of her morning coffee routine. I was about to head down for breakfast when I caught her voice, low and intense. "David, you need to fix this. Your daughter can't stay. She's making things impossible. She doesn't belong here anymore. She's a problem." Froze on the stairs, holding my breath. There was a pause, and I could feel my father's hesitation even from a distance. "But, Sandra, it's her house. I can't just throw her out." "No one's saying throw her out," Sandra replied, her voice turning syrupy, the manipulative tone she wielded so well. "Just guide her toward the right path. What about those out-of-state colleges she applied to? Tell her it's good for her independence." My stomach churned as my father replied slowly, "Maybe you're right. I'll talk to her about moving out for college. It might be better for everyone." I waited until Sandra ended the call, then walked into the kitchen, keeping my expression neutral. I poured myself a bowl of cereal, acting as if I hadn't overheard. James and Melissa shuffled in, looking uneasy. Sandra entered last, still clutching her phone. "Good morning, everyone," she chirped, as if the previous night never happened. We sat in silence, the only sounds the crunch of cereal and clinking spoons. Then, as casually as if discussing the weather, I said, "Oh, by the way, starting next month, everyone will need to pay rent." The silence that followed was so thick I could hear the kitchen clock ticking. Sandra stared at me, stunned, as if I'd spoken in another language. James and Melissa froze, spoons mid-air, exchanging nervous glances. Sandra broke the silence with a forced laugh that sounded more like a cry. "You're joking, right?" she asked, her voice almost pleading. "No, Sandra," I said firmly. "You've lived here for free for years. It's time to contribute." She swallowed hard, struggling to stay composed. "That's nonsense. We're a family and—" "We're not a family," I cut in, my patience gone. "You made that clear when you demanded I pay rent while your kids did nothing. Now everyone will be treated equally." James scoffed, trying to seem unbothered, but his unease was obvious. "This is stupid. I'm not paying anything." "Then you're welcome to find another place to live," I shot back, meeting his gaze. Melissa, usually quiet in conflicts, spoke up. "I'm still in college. How am I supposed to pay rent?" "Maybe you should have thought about that before splurging on parties and designer clothes," I replied. "Don't worry, the rent will be fair. I can even help you find a job," Sandra snapped, slamming her hand on the table. "You've lost your mind. This house has always been our home." I held her gaze, unflinching. "Funny you say that, Sandra, when just yesterday I heard you trying to convince my father to kick me out of my own house. Did you think I wouldn't find out?" Her face paled, and for a moment she was speechless. Melissa looked faint, and James stared at his plate, wishing he could vanish. "I was only trying to help you be more independent," Sandra stammered, panic creeping in. "Oh, of course," I said sarcastically. "How generous of you to push me out of the house my grandparents left me while you and your kids live here for free." She opened her mouth to speak, but I raised a hand to stop her. "Don't worry. I've made my decision. You'll all sign formal rental agreements. If you want to stay, it's on my terms." Sandra stood abruptly, trying to cling to some authority. "This is outrageous. David would never allow this." "Maybe you should call him again and ask," I said. "Or better yet, ask what he'll do if I decide to evict everyone and sell the house." The shock on her face was almost satisfying. She knew I could do it, and the thought clearly terrified her. That night, locked in my room, I heard muffled arguments downstairs, Sandra likely scheming to outmaneuver me. But I was ready. The next day, I called a meeting. Sandra tried to dodge it, but I made it clear she had no choice. By mid-morning, we were all in the living room. Sandra, James, and Melissa looked uneasy, while I sat calmly, in control. "Here are the rental contracts," I said, handing each a copy. "You have 1 month to decide if you're staying." Sandra's hands shook as she took the paper, her face reddening as she read. "This is absurd. You can't do this." "Actually, I can," I said. "I own the house." James tossed his contract on the floor, fuming. "This is unfair. We're your family." "No, James," I corrected. "You're my stepmother and half-siblings who treated me like a maid for years. If you want to stay, you'll pay like anyone else." The argument stretched on for hours, but I held firm. Sandra realized there was no way out. Before storming off, she took one last jab. "You'll never have your father's support after this." I smiled, weary but resolute. "We'll see." In the days that followed, Sandra tried everything, manipulating my father, stirring tension, even turning James and Melissa against me. But it didn't work. They all signed the contracts, and the first payments came the next month. After years of being sidelined, I was finally in charge. For the first time, I didn't care about their opinions. I had the house, the authority, and most importantly, my peace of mind. They could face reality now. Months passed, and the tension in the house only grew. At first, Sandra, James, and Melissa acted like nothing had changed, paying the first month's rent grudgingly, as if I'd back down. I didn't. Payments started arriving late, first by days, then weeks. Excuses piled up, unexpected costs, mounting bills, temporary hardships. But I saw through it. James stopped buying pricey games and stayed holed up in his room. Melissa quit flaunting new outfits and rarely left the house. Sandra looked worn out, her face etched with exhaustion and dark circles, decided it was time to resolve things for good. On a rainy evening, I gathered everyone in the living room. The air was heavy. My father sat on the couch, defeated, while Sandra stood with her arms crossed, clinging to a fading sense of superiority. James and Melissa kept their heads down, avoiding my gaze. "It's been 3 months since you've paid rent on time," I began, my voice steady but firm. "I could evict you all right now." Sandra's eyes widened, indignant. "You wouldn't dare." I looked at her coldly. "Don't test how much I've put up with." "But," I continued, "I'll be fair. I won't charge my father rent, not because he can't pay, but because I know he's been manipulated. Out of respect for him, I'll exempt him." My father looked up, surprised, but stayed silent. He knew I was right. "You, Sandra, are a different story," I said, fixing my eyes on her. "You've treated me like a servant, ordering me around while your kids did nothing. So, here's my offer. You can stay, but instead of paying with money, you'll pay with work. You'll clean the house, do laundry, cook. You'll be the maid." Sandra's face went ashen. She pressed a hand to her mouth, barely containing her shock. "You're joking," she whispered. "I'm not," I said firmly. "And to be clear, you'll wear a maid's uniform, black dress, white apron, hairnet, the whole thing. If you're going to work, do it properly." Sandra stood frozen, then turned to my father, tears welling. "David, are you going to let her humiliate me like this?" He shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. "Dad, with all due respect, stay out of this," I said. "You know why I'm sparing you. But Sandra needs to answer for her actions." He sighed, head bowed. Sandra sobbed quietly. Melissa looked pale, and James stayed silent. Sandra left the room, defeated. The next morning, I found her in the kitchen, dressed in a simple black dress, white apron tied around her waist, and a hairnet over her hair. Her face was blank as she scrubbed the counter. "Good morning, Sandra," I said casually. She didn't respond. I grabbed a glass of orange juice and, as if by accident, let it slip, spilling juice across the floor. "Oops, my mistake," I said. "Could you clean that up?" She paused, then slowly knelt and wiped the floor with a rag. It didn't end there. At lunch, I sat at the table and asked Sandra to serve me. "Sandra, add more sauce to my plate and don't spill it." Her hands shook as she served me in silence. I looked her in the eye, relishing the role reversal. It wasn't cruelty. It was justice. Later, I called her to the living room. "Sandra, the windows are filthy. Clean them now." She hesitated. "It's getting dark." I tilted my head. I said, "Clean them, Sandra, or would you rather pay rent?" Her face flushed, but she grabbed the cleaning supplies and got to work. I turned to James and Melissa, who watched silently. "You two could pitch in, you know. Or would you prefer higher rent?" They quickly retreated to their rooms. Sandra cleaned in silence. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, feeling a peace I hadn't known in years. It wasn't joy or malice. It was the certainty that I'd restored order. Sandra got what she deserved. My father made his choice, and I made mine. If anyone thinks I was harsh, let them. No one lived my reality. Now I have peace, and I won't give it up for anyone.